Maries. You're going to fold it in half like this. Can you turn your machine on? Oh, haha, it's mine, never mind. You're gonna pin in the center. And as a side note, this chalk, this wax chalk, steams out. Like if you were to press this, the lines actually go away. So you want to pin in the center first, then you pin towards the tips. And like I said, I did all the other darts, so this is the only one I'll demo for you guys, but just as I said, a little refresher. Hopefully it will go a little faster. Then for the fisheye darts, anybody tell me how I start the dart that's different than the other darts?
In the middle, and then go out.
I start in the middle and then go out. Do a little back stitch in the middle. And again, I'm gonna shortcut and do a little back stitch, even though I did want to kind of hopefully wear this thing. I never make stuff out of real fabric, but we did get a whole new shipment of, not shipment, but a whole new batch of fabrics for you guys. So I did want to check out what's in there, but if you guys want to start looking through some of the new boxes under the tables, that stuff's for you. So I don't know what's in there though. It's like kind of a lot of upholstery stuff. And if you notice, this is a corduroy. Does anybody see something about this corduroy that like maybe looks a little bit different than? Yes, I did not cut it on the bias. However, the grain of the corduroy is on the bias. So it's going to be interesting the way this turns out. But again, that's something you would notice. If you did want to keep this on the straight of grain, you'd want to cut on the bias, right? Also, that being said, because this is corduroy, it's a velvet, which means it has a little pile, little hair. When I did a little bit of pressing, and you'll notice that some of the pressing, it kind of marks it up. Usually when you use a velvet pad, if you're gonna press velvet or corduroy. So again, this stuff might look a little not so perfectly great and finished when we're actually done. Can anybody tell me the last step of the fisheye dart that is good to do?
Cut a little bit in the middle.
Yes, thank you, Sonia. Cut a little clip in the middle, and that's just to kind of make it flatten out a little bit. I've pressed the other parts, so I'm just gonna set this aside right now. The other thing that I did was I made a back lining piece. Now this back lining piece probably doesn't look like anything that you guys have made because I also added a 1-inch vent in the back, which all you need to do is, this would have been cut on the fold for you guys, but I added a 1/2 inch seam allowance at the top and the bottom and then an additional 1/2 inch in the center. And so what I'm going to do is actually sew the center back down so that I can have this be one piece, but then I'm gonna stop right here. And you can actually go across the top if you want to really not have a hole in it. And it basically is going to create a pleat for us. Same thing down here. And you can base number 5 stitch across it if you want it to be closed temporarily for the putting together of the garment. Does everybody kind of understand what I'm talking about? Okay.
Yes.
So when I open this up now, if you notice there's a seam and there's what will look like a seam right there, but if there is any kind of pulling across the back, which we know we move a lot like this, it'll have a little give across that center of the shoulder blades. You can do the vent all the way down, but you really don't need across the waist or on the hip like that. And so when you press this, you would just press this down nice and flat, and like I said, it will move open for you, but it won't kind of pop out and be, it's on the inside. So this back piece is going to be part of the lining, but this back piece is going to get attached to my back facing, if I can ever get it. So this facing piece, in order to create the back pieces, one needs to get attached to this. Now you'll notice there's my dart, right? Those of you who are making this, you don't need the dart. The dart doesn't need to be part of it anymore because I've created a seam. So now that dart gets absorbed into the seam. So I'm going to go ahead and put these together. And so I would prefer to press my lining, but again, I'm just gonna sit here like this. Curves are a little tough. You can always stay stitch and you can cut your clips in here. Again, when things cross over like that, it's okay if it's at the 1/2 inch seam allowance because that means that it's going to fold back and be correct. So you don't have to worry about that. And a few people have kind of come to me a little bit worried about not being able to get things to match, especially those curved seams. You can manipulate it, just kind of work with the fabric. Remember that it is sort of malleable. You can pull it like that, you can clip it a little bit. So here I can actually clip in here to create that. And you don't want to, you can cheat a little here and there, but you really want to do your best to get those raw edges to be even. It will make a difference to the fit. Remember that we found all these shapes by draping, and we don't want to, you know, ignore that too much, because that would have, it is the material or the information that we had from that, from the shape of the body, and so we want to try and keep as true to that as we possibly can. Again, anywhere where there's a curve, you can also pull a little bit on the ends. It's a little tricky, you know, you can pull with your pinky, that's what I do, and then I use my pointer finger. It's kind of takes a little practice, but then, you know, once you have the center of each of these, you can redistribute any kind of excess fabric that isn't laying in there. So again, pull and readjust. So again, I kind of pull with my pinky. All right, so then I'm going to go ahead and sew these together around that curve. Again, I'm going to sew on the side that is has the more fabric, so that it's as accurate as possible. So right now I'm actually preparing the inside of my jacket, not even working on the outside. But again, with these tailored jackets, a lot of the inside gets seen, and so we want to make sure. And the higher quality, the more expensive your pieces, the nicer the lining is going to be. Like I said, there are times that you can use other things like the Hong Kong seam or partial linings. Lots of interesting ways to kind of approach this that you can do. And for this, you don't have to do this, but just as a decorative thing, I'm just going to do a nice little top stitch here to make this look kind of finished. So now I have my back piece, which I can set aside, and that's going to be the inside of the jacket. Alright. So, yeah, of course. The next thing we're going to do, I'm going to prepare the facing and the lining pieces, because again, here we have our two pieces of facing. I've already put my interfacing on them. Again, remember, make sure they're opposite mirror images, otherwise you'll have some problems. I'm just going to flip these over so they're on the right side, and then I'm going to put my jacket lining pieces on these. So this would be right sides together here and right sides together here. Now, because these are my patterns, I actually don't really have very many notches on them here. I think I notched the waist on both of them. Also, once you put the interfacing on, the notching gets a little bit harder, but they should fit because they came from the same exact pattern. Remember, we just split them down that princess line where the dart was, so they actually should go together nicely. And again, always try to pin at the ends of your seams, and then you kind of go into the center, especially if they're curved. On the straightaways, it's a little bit more straightforward, but as you get into any kind of curved seam like this, you want to make sure that it's evenly distributed. So if you start at one end and go the other way, it's not quite going to be accurate. So you start in the middle, and then, as I mentioned, distribute. And of course, you can always clip if something's really giving you a lot of trouble. Remember, things might pucker towards the top of that seam allowance, but you can always, that stuff can get absorbed into the seam, and you might not actually have a problem with it. So a nice 1/2 inch seam allowance here. All right, so that would be then the inside, and that's the front of the jacket. So this ends up being the actual outside of the lapel, like this, and this is the inside of the jacket, rather, so like this. And then when you open the jacket, that's the inside, right? So starting to make a little bit of sense. Okay, getting there. I've never shown students the linings before. We usually just kind of do the facings and stuff, but I think that if you guys are interested in this, which you all kind of seem to be, this is a nice way to do it, right? Nice way to see it, at least. So again, same thing down at the ends. I wish this was like a cooking show where I could like have all this stuff prepared. I should do that. That would be a more responsible teacher. But part of it's also seeing the process and seeing how long it can take. And actually, I mean, how quickly we can put this together. You know, like I said, I think that we should be able to do this by well before class is over. So hopefully, because I still have to meet with a bunch of you guys about your designs. Same thing happens similar to here. If you've noticed, I don't need to sew on the same side each time. You'll find that certain fabrics will be more conducive to you sewing them nicely, and other, you know, and moving along as you're sewing them. So you can, you know, you can go from the bottom to the top. There are general rules about that. You know, you want to try and stick to, I got a little bit off there. You can see that the one on the top is moving a little bit more, and I did get a little bit off track here, but I'm going to keep going. So I am almost an inch off back down there. That would be because I didn't put notches in, and I didn't clip those curves. But this being on the inside of the jacket, I think I can make it work. Same thing here. If I wanted to do a top stitch here, I won't do it on both sides for the sake of time, but you can also just quickly top stitch this down. If there is, you know, this is not the best idea to do this on your first round, because if there is any kind of alterations that you need to make, this is a pain. I messed that up too. This is a pain to take out if you have to adjust stuff. So try not to get too decorative on your first try, but if you do this in muslin first, then you could do it again in real fabric. And I do recommend trying to do a dry run first. Just see how nice that looks. Okay, so just as I was preparing the jacket, I'm going to prepare the whole shell of the lining. So again, here have my back, right sides together, and I'm going to put my shoulder seams together here. A little bit of a difference in the space here, but again, I'm just going to stretch it. I have a little bit of give in this corduroy, which is really nice. A lot of times when you're making these kinds of jackets, you'll be making them out of a wool, usually, or something that usually can be steamed out to fit as you want it to. Remember, these are our patterns, so there may be some imperfections in the way things are fitting. If it's a major difference, you want to take note of it and actually take that to the pattern and fix it. So especially if you're making a muslin, because then when you do it in your actual fabric, it will be correct. Try not to do it, you know, only in your head. If you're going to fix it, bring it over to the pattern, like I said, and really accurately fix it. So again, same thing, those seams weren't quite meeting up. I just force it a little bit. And as long as you're not tearing anything or pulling anything off, you know, too much where it's like not aligning with the other pieces, then it should be okay to pull things out a little bit. so now I have my shell all set. And I want to put one of my collars on this. So I'm going to put the collar without the interfacing again so this can go over it. So I'm going to do right sides together again. These could be a little bit more challenging because they might not exactly be the same shape or look like the same shape as your sample, but because you're the designer, you should have marked your patterns nice and make sure all those notches. Basically, the way to tell is that the top of the collar shouldn't have any notches on it. You should have 2 to 3 notches on it. I like to notch the center back a lot because I find that that is a good starting point for pinning the collar. And then I go out to the end here, and again I'm looking for that point where I need to stop my stitches. So I'm going to put my pin in there. And then I have my little kind of a bend down here. Again, you can clip in here if you need to. And if you see a bunch of fabric like this, like those two aren't lining up, again, they will if I make them, but let me pin the rest of it first and see how it's going. That may be able to be absorbed into some of this space here. I'm like trying to do this as a demonstration, I'm doing it in my lab. Sorry. Okay, so you see how I'm kind of manipulating that. And we have a little bit more room. Those tiny samples are, they're actually a little harder to do, so it's good to try that first. Okay, so this guy is pinned there. That one notch is in the kind of bend of the lapel. And then this one, again, I'm gonna stop that stitch at a 1/2 inch from the match point or that notch that we put in ourselves. And then here, again, this is a nice kind of stretchy corduroy. It's not super stretchy, but it stretches enough for me to kind of manipulate it a little. And so again, every time I'm pinning, I'm stretching out to the sides, pinning into the center. All right, so now I'm gonna sew these together. Again, I'm gonna start at my match point. Couple stitches forward, couple stitches back, making sure everything's nice and flat on the underside, keeping at that 1/2 inch, keeping those raw edges nice and even. And I'm always feeling with my fingers to try and make sure that where the needle is going to be flat. You don't want to put your hands anywhere near where the needle is, but you do kind of want to go and just, you can also see how I flip it up sometimes to check, especially here, because I want to make sure where my stitches end is 1/2 inch from that match point or that end point. Okay. So now this side is ready to be set aside, and that can be sewn to the top in a minute when we finish this. Okay, so now again I've prepared this, so I already did my my darts. I have not done my my stay stitching yet. I'm gonna leave the armholes because I'm actually not gonna be doing anything with those today. But my shoulder seams, I'm gonna put my shoulder seams together first, and then I'm gonna go around the neck for the stay stitching. So you can also wait and do the whole thing at the end if you like. That just makes it a little bit more, a little quicker sometimes, a little more efficient. Got a little bit extra on my shoulder seams, so then something that I will do on my patterns is check those shoulder seams and make sure that they actually match up. I'm not sure if that was my cutting or perhaps a pattern issue. That's why that's not fitting. Did I really do that?
Did you put a dart in the neck hole?
Did I do that on both sides? No. That's why that didn't meet up though. See, okay, so that's a good example of what not to do. And also why those notches are important, because and why things, if they don't meet up, are good to kind of, double check on. So I thought that was a pattern thing, but it was actually a sewing thing. Another thing is, I know we have this hard and fast rule about darts going always towards the center. If you notice, we have these 2 darts at the same spot, and this is a little thick, and if I put all of that on one side, that's 2, 4, 6 layers of fabric. So in this case, I'm actually gonna switch that direction of the dart and put it the other way and evenly distribute that. It's not gonna do anything to the fit, it's not gonna do anything to the way it looks, it's just gonna help that there's not a big, giant, bulky seam right on the shoulder. And again, that will make a difference as you're pinning if you can just kind of double check on those, on the way that you're pinning down your stitches and your seam allowances, or your darts rather, not your stitches, your darts and your seam allowances. Does anybody have a seam ripper handy? I think I've shown most of you guys this, but you know this little red ball? Once you start it, if you use that little red ball carefully, you can actually do the whole seam really quickly like that. That's what that little thing is actually for. Because if you use the pointy side, you'll probably put a big giant rip in your clothes. So what happened here is I actually just used my, I had accidentally gone to the wrong notches. I used the wrong notches. And so those notches are actually here. Oh, there it is. That little one and that one. Okay. So again, if something like that happens, you know, just quick, easy fix. That's not a big deal. Happens to the best of us, clearly. You guys aren't even paying attention anymore. I know I've lost you. The demos help though, right? You guys, this is good to see, right? Does anybody have a bobbin wound? I want to black. Yeah, can I use that? I'll fill one up in black for you. Is that all right? Okay. So, back to putting my other front piece on here. So again, making sure that they're mirror images. They're going the correct way. Again, pressing would be a really good thing to be doing as you're going along here. And again, I'm going to open up those darts so that they aren't going the same way. Who can tell me what's next?
Collar.
Yes. So I'm I'm going to put the collar onto the jacket. This one should have the interfacing. There are different rules about which one should have the interfacing. There's different, not rules, but schools of thought, if you will. I tend to not like to see that bubbliness sometimes. If you're using a fabric like this where it doesn't matter, the bubbling, won't, like if you have this, like there is some wrinkling that can happen with the glue interfacing. And so you have to be a little bit careful where, if you want to have that top color, depending on the fabric really. All right, so my center back here, put that a bit deep, so be careful about, oh, and stay stitching. Some stay stitching here. Again, that stay stitching should be in the seam allowance, within the seam allowance. Anytime you go over a seam, try to make sure it's open. So again, pressing before you stay stitch is always a really good idea, especially where this clip was, definitely important. Also, stay stitching, it becomes a little less of a problem if you do go beyond that 1/2 inch, if you're using the same color thread and the same fabric, of course. But you can still sometimes catch it and see it, and it's kind of a little bush league. Okay. You can never find the clips with the interface in there. Notches at the center back. And whenever you have a piece that is symmetrical, if you don't have a notch marked on your pattern at the center back, you can always just fold it in half carefully and accurately and find that spot. So again, I'm pinning out to this match point here. Again, that point should leave a 1/2 inch from where you start and stop. And then in between, I'm just easing all that extra in and pinning down any kind of dart or seams that might get in my way. You want the sewing part of the process to be easy for you. So that's what this preparation stuff is. It's like past you getting ready for future you to do the sewing. Basically distracting me. Okay, so again here at the end point, just put that pin in, or even mark it with something, whatever you need to remind yourself to stop at that point. Again, it becomes a little bit challenging if you have to open that seam up again. So just try to remember to automatically stop there and start there. Again, making sure everything is nice and flat. This time I'm going to sew, I'll do it from this side. Okay. So another reason I put those pins right in the match point too is because when I'm not sewing from the side that has the collar on it, you can't really see that I'm stopping 1/2 inch from that end. So I want to make sure that I'm starting and stopping where that pin is directly going in. So once I put my needle in, I can remove that pin. Again, just a couple stitches forward and a couple stitches back. Make sure you're sticking with that 1/2 inch seam allowance, but make sure that you're not being too skimpy on it. You don't want to go crazy, but you really want to make sure that you're not leaving any holes in this too, especially with those clips. Sometimes they can get escape a little. Okay, so a little back stitch where we're done at that 1/2 inch again. So just double checking that I've left a good 1/2 inch. I've already prepared the inside, so I can now actually have my right sides together. And again, this is a little easier to see right sides and wrong sides when you're actually using real fabric. So those mistakes will probably start to disappear, those of you who have that problem, if you're using fabric that has a right side and a wrong side. So again, I'm going to be putting my collars together, so you can see the collars actually line up really nicely. And where I'm going to be checking is these match points again. So they should be right there, and every